Hey everyone, welcome back to RJK English. Today I'm going back to business English and maybe IELTS or conversational English. We're going to talk about education policy. So China is changing its policy about education right now. I have multiple Chinese students. I think the Chinese government is quite intelligent, as most governments are. Um, but it also it can be a problem. So China, in China, as in Korea, as in India, and in some parts of the U.S., children's education is a very stressful thing and very competitive and stressful. So competitive. Where does this word competitive come from? It comes from the word competition, right? Competition. Competition. Like when we think about Messi, Messi is playing on the soccer field, or I'm trying to think of a cricket player and I can't think of one right now. Um, when they're playing, they're competing, they're trying to win, right? And in a lot of countries, education is very competitive because you have high stakes testing. Sorry. High stakes testing. What is high stakes testing? It means that you take one test, and your score on that test determines whether you will go to a really good school or not. And what do you want to get out of going to a really good school? You want to get a really good job, right? What this indicates is that there are not enough good jobs, right? The jobs are all in big cities. It's expensive to live there. You want to make money so that you can get ahead. This becomes what we call a vicious cycle. So notice this is a circle, and you just keep going around this circle. It's called a vicious cycle. Why is it a vicious cycle? Many of my Indian friends, or my niece in India, I call her my niece, hey Zisha, they have very stressful school lives, especially in high school. So they're getting up at 6 a.m. They're going to school. Then after school, they're maybe doing sports, or they're going to tuitions. Then they're maybe taking an English class, and then after that they're doing some group work. So basically they're working at least 12 hours a day, if not more, just trying to get through high school so that they can get into a university. What happens in the university? You work the same amount, right? Because you want to get into a good graduate school. And then once you get into a good graduate school, you do the same. Why? So that you can get a good job. When you're in a good job, you do the same. Why? So that you can get that higher job and make money so that your kids don't have to live the same life you do. But when your kids grow up, you make them do the same thing you did. This is called a vicious cycle. Vicious comes from the idea of, like, let's think of a wolf or a lion. When they come at you, they're like, "Rrr," and they're not thinking about your feelings. They're going to tear you apart, right? And we've all known people at school or work that are vicious. They will step on top of anybody's head in order to move up in the company. They don't care what happens to you. They just want to get ahead. This is called vicious. Vicious. They will cut your throat in order to move up. This is called being vicious. So a vicious cycle is this type of education. China is changing their policy right now. So, and you could debate whether this is good or bad. They are saying that education outside of school, these type of companies that provide education outside of school, they can't exist anymore. Okay, I don't know exactly what this means, but a lot of these companies will go out of business, and This is going to change a lot for families. Why do families hire these companies? Because they're trying to do well on these tests. Maybe so that their kids can get a job in government or can get into one of these big schools. What what is the cost for, we've already talked about stress, that this causes stress. But what's the other cost? It costs a lot of money it costs a lot of money to hire these extra tutors. Maybe an extra school for the kids to go to, right? So it seems that the Chinese government wants to change this because they want the population to have more children, and if you think about it, if you have a child and it costs a lot to educate them, you're not going to have more children because that's just more children to educate. That could be a reason. I don't know for sure. But it also could be because they want to reduce the stress in these families and the amount that they're paying, right? It could be for a good reason. So this happens in the United States as well. So I live in Baltimore, which is near Washington, D.C. I'm actually from the middle of the country in a very farm area. It's called Iowa. And growing up where I did, we didn't ever imagine going to Harvard. We just wanted to go to the local university and get a good job, This is not very realistic anymore. I found it very hard to find a job there, and I moved to Baltimore, and now I've done well in Baltimore. Right? But where my wife is from, near Washington, D.C., it is a very different experience. People are very stressed all the time because they want their kids to compete in sports, compete in school, get into a good school. Why? So that they can get into a good university like Harvard or, one of the top universities. Why? Because it's very expensive to go there, and they want them to get scholarships so that they can go there and then they can get a really good job and etc. Right? So again, vicious cycle. And I don't want my children around that, because to me, that's horrible. You would be competing all the time, and also you think of the world as a horrible place. If you don't succeed, you are a loser. And therefore your children are not talking with normal people. They're only in this highly competitive environment. I don't really like this, But let's step back for a second and think, why? Why do we push our children this much? It could be because there are fewer jobs, right? There's a fewer good jobs. So there's high competition for those good jobs, which makes us step back and go, what is life like for people that get normal jobs? Let's say there are enough jobs for everybody overall. Okay? Some countries there aren't. But in China, there are enough jobs. In India, I don't know whether this is true or not. But the question is, what is life like if you get a normal job? Okay? Because that's what these people that are competing are scared of. They're scared of getting a normal job. So let's take China, for instance. Let's say that $1,000 per month is a good job. A normal job. It's very hard to live in one of these big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, maybe in Hong Kong. I'm including Hong Kong there. Why? Because of cost of housing. Let's say you make $1,000 a month. To feed yourself and your family costs about $3,000 a year. So that's 3 months of your salary. Then you have to pay for housing. That can be another 6 months of your salary. Another 3 months of your salary. So now we're at 6 months. Then you need to buy clothes. That gets up to 7 months. So now you only have 3 months left of money that you have outside of that. That's not a lot. If you live in one of these areas, you would barely be able to live because housing would cost even more, right? So what if you could live in the small town? What if you make $1,000 in the small town? Well, now housing doesn't cost as much, right? Your family has a garden. So you're not spending as much on food. People are, you have friends around you. You don't have to have this high status because you can be around your friends, right? A lot of when we need high status is because we're not around friends. We need to look really good so that we, feel good about ourselves. Well, but what's the problem of being in those small areas? They don't have the good jobs. So the young people are moving into these big cities. This is happening in the US. I moved to Baltimore when I was younger. People are moving to New York City, to San Francisco, to these big cities because the jobs are there, right? And what happens? They end up spending more money in those areas, and they get in this vicious cycle. Well, what if people were able to stay in their town and still work, and they only made $1,000 per month? How would they do that? The government would have to incentivize companies to hire people from those areas. Why would that maybe happen? Well, right now, going through COVID, people have started working from home. So companies are getting accustomed to people working from home, right? Well, we could use this. If the government would make sure that what would the government need to provide so that people could work from these areas, that are the smaller areas? People would need to have a good internet connection. I think throughout China they have a pretty good internet connection, but it's not as good as Beijing. I'm using China as an example. India is this way. The US is this way as well. So the government could make world-class internet connection throughout the country, and especially in these small areas. But also working from home in these areas, because we know the companies are going to be based out of these big places. Okay, working in these areas, your family is running around the house all the time. How are you going to do your job? What if the government built remote offices in these areas where these companies could rent space and their workers could go into those offices and work from there just like they're working from here? They use Teams or Skype or whatever in order to talk with their company. They work remotely, right? And they have a nice area. There's good internet connection already from the government in those buildings. Okay, so now those people are able to work in those areas. Now, if that's true and there are enough jobs and people can live on $1,000 per month in these areas and have a good life, now this maybe calms down the need for high stakes testing, right? You don't have to be as competitive in order to have a good life. When I was a child in Iowa, we thought this way. We could get a pretty good job going through regular school, and have a pretty good life. That's not exactly true anymore, and that's not exactly true in every country. So for my friends in India, China, Korea, Japan, and India and Pakistan, and other countries that are dealing with the same thing, let's think about why we're making our kids compete. It might be necessary. Maybe we have to. But it might be that we don't have to. Maybe our government, we can't influence our governments very much. But if we think about how we can, how a person can have a good life even if they don't have the greatest job in the world, maybe we can focus on that. If it's true that you can have a pretty good life, maybe your kids don't have to work that hard. The question is, are they working that hard to go through school because of reality or because of fear? Fear and maybe competition, just individual competition. This is a question we have to ask. And we can ask this for ourselves too. Why am I pursuing that top job or whatever? Can I be happy as I am? The answer might be no. Okay? In the United States, people live in fear all the time. We're afraid of being poor. We're afraid of people not looking up to us. We're also afraid of violence. There's a lot of shootings in the US, not in my area, but overall in the US there's a lot of shootings. So people live in fear, and we can get into these vicious cycles based on this. But we can also stop and think, do we really need to do this? So this is, as we learn about what China is doing, India can look at this as well, and others, and the US. Do we need our children to be that stressed out about high stakes testing? Maybe we can look at countries that don't have that system of high stakes testing and look at are their children happy? When we think about the happiest places, Denmark, I think maybe Netherlands would be up there, but Denmark, Sweden, these are not very populated countries, so maybe this isn't realistic. But we can look at them and say, why would people not be so stressed out about school in those areas? And then we can look at how their governments structure their country. And even if we can't affect our country, maybe we can think about this more for ourselves and free up our own minds, So anyways, I hope this is interesting to you. I hope you learned some words and thought about a little bit about how policy, how the government can affect things like children's stress in school by addressing equality throughout the country or opportunity throughout the country. And again, I'm not giving China advice. China runs its country very well. I'm just using this as an example. Okay? So anyways, like and subscribe and make sure to comment. And also go to RJK English. You see the name below. You can go to that on Facebook and we can talk further. All right? See you later.